The sun over the Llano Estacado was not a friend. It was an anvil, and the year 1872 was the hammer. Tahan Numu watched the heat shimmer rise from the packed red earth, making the horizon dance. The air tasted of alkali dust and the promise of thirst, a taste he knew better than any bread. He was 24 years old, and he carried the hunger of his band, the Numunu, like a stone in his gut. His people had known this land when it was only buffalo and sky. Now it was grids and fences and thirst. He sat his best paint stud, the horse a living map of muscle coiled beneath him. The animal was patient in the oppressive stillness, breathing the hot air without complaint. Beside him, Little Fox, barely 16 summers, shifted on his own pony. The boy tried to look bored, rolling a piece of dried grass in his teeth. But Tahan saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking to the settlement huddled in the distance. "We trade," Tahan said. His voice was quiet, rough from the dryness, but it carried, "We do not fight." "They do not know the difference," Little Fox muttered, spitting the grass stem. "To them, our breathing is a fight." Tahan did not answer. He looked at the string of 4 other horses they led, prime breeding stock, their coats shining with health even under the layer of trail dust. These animals were their dignity. They were the price for cornmeal, for salt, for the new repeating rifles that might keep the band fed through the drought that was strangling the high plains. This was his burden, to find peace in a land that demanded war, to protect the young men from the empty glory of violence. Survival was the only war that mattered now, and it was a war fought with patience and horses. The settlement was a scar on the plains, a mile-wide smudge of soddies and rough-cut timber buildings. It had grown like a fungus around the single source of reliable Vice Owen Doyle's saloon. As they drew closer, the smells hit them: stale beer, unwashed bodies, horse manure, and the sharp, acidic tang of human desperation. From inside the saloon, the thin, frantic sound of a banjo clawed at the afternoon air. It was a sound that promised nothing good. Inside that noise, Evelyn Hart was wiping down a rough plank table, her knuckles raw. She was 21, and the dust of her long journey from back east had settled into her very bones. But it had not touched the core of her dream. She was an orphan, Irish stock, small but sturdy. And she had come to this hard country with a locked chest of books and a fierce, quiet belief that children needed letters more than they needed callous. She was living on the bitter charity of her uncle, Owen Doyle. He was a man whose hospitality was as thin as his whiskey, a creature of easy smiles, mounting debt, and small, unseen cruelties. "More glasses. Girl!" Owen snapped from behind the bar. He did not look at her. He was too busy polishing a glass, his eyes fixed on a cluster of men at the far table. His voice was too loud, too friendly. Evelyn flinched but did not look up. She gathered the sticky glasses, the smell of rye making her stomach turn. She felt the weight of her dependency with every breath she took in this room. She needed money, real coin, and the legal right to a piece of land. A homestead claim, perhaps, or a grant from the church mission. Something to build her school. Her uncle's saloon was the only place to earn it. And every coin she was given felt heavy with shame. A payment for enduring the stairs and the smoky air. Tahan dismounted, the leather of his leggings whispering. He left Little Fox with the horses at the livery trough, a silent command passing between them to keep the animals watered and watchful. He moved with a coiled grace, his moccasins silent on the warped boardwalk. He was there for the trading post, but the saloon was where the real deals were made, where the pulse of the white man's world could be felt. He pushed through the bat-wing doors. The air hit him like a physical blow, thick with smoke, sweat, cheap perfume, and the sour smell of spilled dreams. The crowd was the usual mix, a dangerous stew of the displaced. Dutch farmers with sun-baked faces and wide, suspicious eyes. Mexican vaqueros, their silver conchos dull in the gloom. sipping tequila with quiet dignity. Anglo freighters arguing over the new railroad shipping prices, their voices grating. And the Numu, his people. They were pushed to the edges, near the walls, watching, waiting for the white men's laws to change again, to take something more. The railroad was coming. It was an iron snake devouring the plains, and it brought a new kind of man. Tahan saw them at the main table, their boots propped up, their hats pushed back. They were not troopers, though a few uniformed soldiers lounged nearby, their eyes vacant with boredom and whiskey. These new men worked for Everett Pike. Pike was a name spoken in whispers in the camps and in boasts in the saloons. He was buying the land, the water, the politicians. He was the railroad's shadow, and his reach was long. One of Pike's men, a foreman with a heavy gut and a stained vest, laughed loudly, slapping the table. "Doyle says he has got prime stock for tonight, something special." A cavalry sergeant, his tunic dark with sweat, smirked into his mug. "What kind of stock? Not more of his stringy beef, I hope." "Better," the foreman said, leaning in, his voice a conspiratorial rumble that carried across the room. "A marriage auction. Proper like. Doyle even got a drunk preacher to make it legal." Evelyn froze. Her hand, holding the wet rag, tightened until her knuckles were white. A marriage auction. She had heard the whispers, dismissed them as the crude jokes of lonely, cruel men. It was a vile procedure some of the rougher settlements used, a thin coat of legal paint over the simple act of selling a person, a way to move a woman, an orphan, a widow, to whoever paid the most, binding her with a piece of paper blessed by a cutout minister. Owen Doyle was sweating, though the saloon was cooler than the blistering outside. He was talking to Everett Pike's main lieutenant, a man named Barton Hale. Hale was lean and quiet, and his eyes were as flat and cold as river stones. He did not waste time on Pike's loud-mouthed foreman. He was the one who did the cutting. "She is a good girl. Hale." Owen was whining, trying to keep his voice down, but his fear made it carry. 21, educated, reads books. She just needs a provider, a good home. "Pike wants the matter settled," Hale said. His voice was soft, without emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "The debt is due at sundown. You said you had collateral." Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face, a cold rush in the suffocating heat. Collateral. She was the collateral. Her dream of a schoolhouse, her small, fierce independence, the books in her trunk, her very self. It was all just barter for her uncle's gambling debts. She looked at the men at the table, Pike's men, and they were looking back at her, not as a person, but as a thing, an item to be bid on. Tahan watched from the shadows near the door. His eyes had adjusted to the gloom. He saw the girl. She was young, pale with a fear that looked different from the land fear he knew so well. This was not the fear of drought or a hard winter. This was a fear of men, of cages made of wood and law. He saw her uncle, a weak man twisting his hands. He saw Hale, a strong man, which was always worse. He had come for flour and salt. He had come to trade horses for the survival of his people, but he recognized the shape of this. The strong taking, the weak being sold, the railroad law, the new law that said everything, even a person, had a price. He turned, the bat-wing doors swinging shut behind him, and walked back out into the blinding white sun. The frantic banjo music followed him like a curse, thin and desperate. He had to see to his horses. They were his only power here. But he knew, with a certainty that settled cold and hard in his chest, that he would be back before sundown. The stone in his gut was heavier now. It was not just hunger. It was a cold, familiar rage. Sundown bled across the llano, turning the red dust to the color of a fresh wound. Inside the saloon, the air was thicker, hotter. Kerosene lamps smoked, casting greasy yellow light that made every face look sick or cruel. The banjo player was hammering out a frantic rhythm, a noise that set Evelyn's teeth on edge. She was standing by the back wall, near the kitchen door, trapped. Her uncle, Owen Doyle, had forced her to change into her only Sunday dress, a pale blue cotton that now felt like a burial shroud. It was clean, which made her feel exposed, a bright target in the smoky gloom. Every man in the saloon was watching her. She could feel their eyes, measuring, speculating. Owen Doyle, his face slick with sweat, climbed onto a wooden crate. He held up his hands, his smile a desperate grimace. Gentlemen, if I might have your attention." The banjo stuttered to a halt. The low murmur of conversation died, replaced by an expectant, hungry silence. At the front table, Barton Hale sat perfectly still. He did not look at Doyle. He was watching Evelyn. "We all face hard times," Doyle began, his voice shaking just slightly, trying for the easy tone of a salesman. "The drought, the freight costs. A man finds his debts piled high, but I am a man of honor." A harsh laugh came from the back. "Your honor is worth about as much as your whiskey." "Doyle." No, Doyle said, waving his hand. "I mean to pay. I have collateral, an asset." He gestured toward Evelyn. She froze, her blood turning to ice water. This was it. It was real. "My niece, Evelyn Hart," Doyle announced, his voice cracking. "A fine, educated woman, 21 years of age, a teacher. She finds herself alone, unprotected. She needs a husband, a provider." "Get on with it." "Doyle," shouted Pike's foreman. "This ain't a tea party." "Right," Doyle swallowed. "Tonight, to settle my accounts with Mr. Pike, the contract for her hand in marriage goes to the highest bidder, a legal, binding document, blessed by Preacher Sims himself." He pointed to a small, rat-like man in a stained frock coat who was slumped at a table, clutching a bottle and a metal stamp. A roar of crude laughter and shouted comments filled the room. Men pushed forward. Evelyn pressed herself back against the rough wood, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She looked for an escape, but the kitchen door was blocked, and the front door was a sea of broad, sweating backs. "Do I hear $10? Doyle yelled, trying to sound like a real auctioneer. "10, a drunken freighter bellowed, grabbing at his belt. "I see 10, do I hear 15? "15, another voice slurred. Barton Hale watched, a faint, cold smile touching his lips. He let the small bids play out, enjoying the spectacle. He was enjoying her humiliation. He would let them bid her up to $30, perhaps $40, and then he would place Pike's bid, a single, final number that would crush all hope. Everett Pike wanted this girl. He had been offended when she had refused to serve him his whiskey last week, looking through him as if he were not there. Pike did not tolerate being slighted. He would take her, and he would break her, and he would do it using the law. 25. 30, I'll give 30. Evelyn closed her eyes. She was going to be sick. This was the end of her dream. There would be no school. There would only be this. The batwing door slammed open, swinging back hard against the outside walls. The saloon went instantly, shockingly quiet. Tahan Numu stood in the doorway. The bloody sunset silhouetted him, making him seem larger than a man, a figure carved from the dark earth and the dying light. He did not move for a long moment. His eyes adjusted to the smoke and the gloom. He saw the men, their faces turned to him, a mix of fear and hatred. He saw Doyle on the crate, his mouth open. He saw Hale, whose hand had moved to rest on the butt of his pistol. And he saw Evelyn. She was pale as bone, backed against the wall like a trapped rabbit, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond anything the plains could produce. He stepped inside. Little Fox was right behind him, his face a mask of nervous defiance. The crowd instinctively parted. creating a narrow path. Tahan's moccasins made no sound on the filthy floor. He stopped in the center of the room. Doyle, seeing a new customer, even a savage one, found his voice. "This is a private auction. Tahan, white men's business." Tahan ignored him. His gaze moved from Evelyn to Hale, then back to Doyle. He spoke, his voice low, but it carried to every corner of the silent room. "You have a debt," Doyle stammered. "I do. With Mr. Pike, this is how I'm paying it." "2 paint studs," Tahan said. "The breeding stock at the rail, and this." He unslung a heavy leather pouch from his belt and tossed it onto the floor at Doyle's feet. It landed with a solid, metallic thud. "Silver, more than your debt." The silence stretched, thick and heavy. 2 paint studs, breeding stock. That was a fortune. It was more than the girl was worth, more than the entire saloon was worth. It was an impossible bid. Doyle stared at the pouch, his greed a living thing on his face. Barton Hale stood up slowly. His chair scraped on the floor, the sound unnaturally loud. "This is not his auction. Doyle." His voice was soft, deadly. "Pike's bid has not been made." "He named a price for a debt," Tahan said, his voice flat. He did not look at Hale. He was watching Doyle. "I paid it." "He is right," Doyle said, his voice squeaking with a sudden rush of relief and avarice. He scrambled off the crate and snatched up the pouch. "The debt is paid, sold." "No," Hale hissed. "You just sold Pike's property." "It was an auction," Doyle yelped, backing away. "Highest bidder, he bid highest." "This is not," Hale said, stepping forward, "a legal sale. He cannot marry a white woman." "It is legal," Doyle shouted, desperate to keep the horses and the silver. "Preacher, get the paper. It is a marriage contract, a temporal writ of protection, perfectly legal." The filthy preacher. Sims staggered to his feet, fumbling a creased, pre-signed paper from his coat. It is, binding, as God is my—" Tahan moved. He walked past Hale, who was rigid with fury. The other men backed away, giving him room. He stopped in front of Evelyn. She flinched, pressing harder against the wall, her eyes squeezed shut. She waited for his hand, rough, to grab her arm, to claim his purchase. But he did not touch her. She opened her eyes. He was standing a foot away from her, simply watching her. In the smoky light, she could see the lines on his face, carved by sun and hardship. He looked tired. He leaned in, just slightly. His voice was a bare whisper, meant only for her, lost in the sudden angry murmuring of the room. "I bought protection," he said, "not your body." Evelyn stared at him, her mind, numb with terror, could not process the words. Protection. The preacher shoved the paper and a stub of pencil toward Tahan. "Make your mark. Comanche." Tahan took the pencil and made a swift, strong mark on the line. Then the preacher pushed the paper at Evelyn. "Your name, girl. Here." Her hand was shaking so violently she could not hold the pencil. She was signing her life away. But the man's words echoed in her head. "Not your body." She looked at him again. His face was impassive. He was not looking at her. He was watching Hale. She scrawled her name. It was an ugly, broken signature. "Done!" Sims yelled, and he slammed his metal stamp onto the bottom of the page, smearing the ink. "Binding next!" Tahan turned. The crowd was surging, angry. "This ain't right. A Comanche. He stole her." "You just bought yourself a war, Tahan," Hale said, his voice calm again. He had lost this round, but his eyes promised retribution. "Pike will not forget this. He will have the horses. And he will have her." Tahan did not answer him. He started for the door. Evelyn remained frozen, clutching the wall. The shame was suffocating. She was a bought woman. She had a new master. It did not matter what he had whispered. She had been sold like livestock. Tahan stopped at the door and looked back. He saw her, trapped between the jeering crowd and her weeping, greedy uncle. He saw her humiliation. He paused, then slowly unfastened the heavy wool cloak from his own shoulders. It was worn, but clean, smelling of horse and dry grass and wood smoke. He walked back to her. The crowd quieted again, watching. He held out the cloak. Evelyn stared at it. "Stay or go is your choice," he said, his voice low and rough, but clear. "I only opened the door." She looked at Owen Doyle, who was already stuffing the silver into his pockets, his eyes averted. She looked at Barton Hale, whose flat, cold stare was a promise of violation. She looked at the faces of the other men, hungry and cruel. Then she looked at Tahan. He was offering her a choice. It was the only choice she had been offered all day. She reached out and took the cloak. The wool was heavy, warm. She wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling the edges together, hiding her pale dress, hiding herself from their eyes. It felt like the first moment of safety she had known in months. Tahan nodded. Once. He turned and walked out of the saloon. Evelyn took a deep breath, pulling the scent of smoke in the plains into her lungs. She held her head high and, without looking back at her uncle, she followed him out into the darkness. Little Fox was waiting, holding the reins of Tahan's paint stud and his own pony. He was also holding the reins of a third horse, a calm-looking mare. They heard the saloon door slam open behind them. Hale's voice cut through the night. "They will not make the river get the horses." "You ride?" Tahan asked Evelyn.
"Yes,"
she whispered, her voice hoarse. He gestured to the mare. "This one is calm." He swung onto his stud in one fluid motion. Little Fox mounted his pony. Evelyn, her hands clumsy in the folds of the heavy cloak, pulled herself into the saddle. They moved out, not toward the main trail, but west, toward the dark, broken land that marked the edge of the Canadian River. They were barely clear of the last sod house, the last glimmer of yellow light, when they heard it, the thunder of at least half a dozen horses, riding hard, leaving the livery, coming for them. "Now," Tahan said. His voice was not a shout, but a sharp command. He kicked his stud into a hard gallop, disappearing instantly into the blackness. Evelyn gripped the reins, the unfamiliar saddle beneath her, the heavy cloak flapping. She kicked the mare, her heart pounding a frantic, terrified rhythm against her ribs, and plunged into the dark after him. The darkness swallowed them whole. There was no moon, no stars, only the desperate pounding of hooves on the dry, packed earth. Evelyn clung to the mare's mane, the heavy wool cloak Tahan had given her threatening to catch the wind and pull her from the saddle. She rode blindly, trusting the animal beneath her to follow the shapes disappearing and reappearing in the blackness ahead. Tahan on his paint stud, and the slighter shadow of Little Fox. Behind them, the shouts from the settlement were faint, but the sound of the pursuit was growing. Barton Hale was a hunter, and he had his pack. They were riding hard, their horses fresh. "This way." Tahan's voice was not a shout. It was a low command that cut through the wind. He veered sharply north, away from the main trails and into the broken gullies that led toward the Canadian River. The air changed. It grew heavy, humid, and the smell of ozone, the electric tang of distant lightning, cut through the dust. The first massive drop of rain hit Evelyn's cheek, cold as a coin. Then another. Within a minute, the sky tore open. It was not a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water that turned the red dust to thick, slick mud almost instantly. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. The world narrowed to the sound of thunder, the slam of the rain, and the sucking sound of the horses' hooves fighting the ground. "They will lose our trail in this," Little Fox yelled, his young voice triumphant. "They will follow the sound." Tahan called back. "They know where we are going, the river." The pursuit did not slow. If anything, the storm made them more desperate, knowing the river would rise. They burst from a dry arroyo onto the riverbank. It was not a bank so much as a wide, dark expanse of sand and shadow. The Canadian River was a mile wide and, in most places, only an inch deep. But tonight, with the storm, it was a different beast. The water was rising, a churning, muddy torrent that was already swallowing the sandbars. "We cross now," Tahan yelled over the roar of the wind. He spurred his horse into the water. The animal plunged, found its footing, and began to move. Little Fox followed. Evelyn hesitated. The water looked alive, a monstrous, dark thing. Behind her, she heard a sound, a sharp crack, a gunshot, swallowed by the thunder. Hale's men were close. She kicked the mare. The horse stumbled, panicked, and then plunged into the churning water. The current was stronger than she expected. It grabbed the mare's legs, pulling them downstream. The horse fought for footing on the shifting, rocky bottom. They were halfway across, the water soaking Evelyn's dress, pulling at her legs. When the mare's hind legs slipped, the horse let out a high, terrified whinny and scrambled, its front hooves lashing. Evelyn lost her grip on the reins. She screamed as she felt herself slide from the saddle, the wool cloak heavy as lead, pulling her down into the cold, rushing blackness. She did not even have time to think. A hand, hard as iron, clamped around her arm. Tahan was beside her. He had wheeled his stud back in an impossible turn. He grabbed her, his fingers digging into her flesh, pulling her up. But her weight, the mare's panic, and the slickness of the mud beneath his own horse's hooves was too much. His stud slipped. Tahan held onto her, refusing to let go, and the momentum of their combined weight pulled him clear from his saddle. They fell together. It was not a gentle tumble. It was a violent crash into the riverbank, a tangle of limbs and wet wool and cold, sucking mud. They slid down the bank and smashed into a thicket of tall reeds. Evelyn landed hard. The air knocked from her lungs. Tahan was on top of her, his weight crushing her into the soft earth. The rain hammered them. She could not breathe. For a terrible second, she was back in the saloon, trapped. Then the weight was gone. He rolled off her instantly, pushing himself up on one hand. He was breathing hard, a harsh rasp in the dark. They were hidden from the river and the trail, surrounded by the thick, whispering reeds. The pursuit thundered past them, on the bank, maybe 50 yards away, obscured by the rain. "Hale, this way, they are on the far side," a voice roared. The horses galloped on, deeper into the storm. Silence fell, broken only by the rain and their own breathing. Evelyn lay in the mud, soaked to the skin, shaking. Tahan was a dark shape beside her. He had saved her. He had fallen with her. She could feel the heat coming off him, even in the cold. It was the first time they had truly touched, a collision of desperation and instinct. "Can you move?" His voice was low, rough. I think so." She tried to sit up. Her body ached, but nothing felt broken. He reached out, his hand hovering, not touching her, but ready. She pushed herself to her hands and knees, the mud cold and gritty. "The horses," she whispered. "My stud will not go far. He is trained. Little Fox has yours." He rose in a low crouch, listening. The sound of Hale's men was gone, faded into the storm. Tahan let out a low whistle, like a night bird. A moment later, two shapes emerged from the rain. Little Fox, his face a slash of white in the dark, leading the mare. Tahan's paint was already standing patiently a few yards away. "They went on," Little Fox said, his voice quiet. "The storm covers us. We find shelter." Tahan said. He helped Evelyn to her feet, his hand closing on her elbow just long enough to steady her. Then, releasing, the touch was impersonal, brief, but it sent a strange, cold fire through her. They rode for another hour, moving slowly, letting the horses pick their way through the breaks. The storm was easing, settling into a cold, steady downpour. Tahan found what he was looking for, a deep overhang, a slice of rock cut from the side of a bluff, almost a shallow cave, shielded from the wind and rain. They dismounted. Tahan pulled the saddles from the horses and hobbled them where they could graze on the sparse, wet grass. Little Fox gathered dry twigs from the deepest part of the shelter, and Tahan, using a small kit of flint and steel, managed to spark a tiny, fragile flame. He fed it, stick by stick, until it caught, a small, courageous circle of orange in the vast, wet darkness. Evelyn huddled by the growing fire, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. The wet wool cloak was heavy. She shrugged it off, leaving her in her thin, soaked cotton dress. Tahan handed her the cloak back. "Keep it," he said. "It will hold your heat, even wet." She wrapped it around her, closer this time, and sat on a dry patch of rock, holding her numb hands to the fire. Little Fox was already checking the horses, his movements efficient, practiced. Evelyn watched Tahan. He was staring into the flames, his face hard, the firelight catching the moisture on his dark hair. He had paid a fortune for her. He had saved her life, and he had not laid a hand on her, except to save her. "Why?" she finally asked. Her voice was a croak. He did not look up from the fire. "Why what? Why did you do that? The horses? The silver? That was too much. For me." He finally turned his head. His eyes met hers. "I did not do it for you." Evelyn flinched. The words were blunt, almost cruel. "Hale," Tahan continued, his voice flat. "Pike, men like that, they believe everything can be owned. They believe everyone has a price. I do not like what they believe." "But you bought me," she whispered, the shame of it returning. "The paper, the preacher, I am bound to you." He looked back at the fire. "You are not bound. You are numunu." "What?" "The people," he said. "That is what we call ourselves. Numunu, among the people. A man gives gifts for a wife, horses, blankets. It is not a purchase. It is a promise. It shows he honors her. It shows her family that he can provide, that he will protect her. It is a responsibility." He poked the fire with a stick, sending a small shower of sparks up. "That paper is a white man's shield. Hale cannot take you now. The soldiers cannot arrest you. You are my wife on their paper, but you are not my wife." He looked at her again, his gaze direct, unflinching. "I will not touch you. You sleep where you sleep. You eat what I eat. And when you are safe, when you have a place to go, you go. The paper is ash. It is a lie to fight a lie." Evelyn stared at him, her mind trying to grasp the shape of his words. He was offering her dignity. He had used his wealth, the horses his band needed for survival, to buy her a choice. Little Fox returned, settling on the other side of the fire. He pulled a piece of dried venison from his pouch and tossed it to Tahan, who passed it to Evelyn. She took it, her fingers clumsy. "They will not stop, Tahan," Little Fox said quietly. He was no longer a boy trying to be brave. He was a scout, reporting. "I know," Tahan said. "It is not just the girl," Little Fox said. Evelyn looked up. "When I waited at the livery," Little Fox continued, "I was near the saloon window. Hale was talking with Pike's foreman before the auction. They were drinking. They said Pike has a contract, a water contract." Tahan went very still. The hand holding the stick over the fire did not move. "What water?" Tahan asked, his voice lethally soft. "Ours," Little Fox said. "The Cottonwood Springs. Hale said Pike will dam the springs and run a pipe. He is going to sell the water to the railroad. He said it was worth $10,000. The stick in Tahan's hand snapped. He threw the pieces into the fire. He stood and walked to the mouth of the cave, staring out into the dark, rainy night. Evelyn saw the tension in his back, the rigid line of his shoulders. When he spoke, his voice was different. It was raw, filled with a pain that went far beyond this night. "When I was a boy," he said to the darkness, "the smallpox came, the white sickness. We did not have the medicine. We had only the springs, the clean water. Still, we lost so many. My mother, my sisters. We put up the white flags on the death lodges. The whole valley was white with flags. The only thing that kept the rest of us alive was that water. It is the only clean water on this part of the Llano. It is our life." He turned back, his face a mask of cold fury in the firelight. "Pike is not just stealing water, he is stealing our ghosts. He is stealing our future." Evelyn's own troubles, her own fears, suddenly seemed small, thin. She was not the only one fighting for a scrap of life. Tahan looked at her, his eyes seeming to see her for the first time, not as a burden, but as something else. "You wanted a school," he stated. "Yes," she whispered. "I have books. I needed a piece of land, a homestead claim, or help from the mission board at Fort Ellison." "Fort Ellison," Tahan repeated. "There is a judge there, Judge Boone. They say she is a hard woman, but fair. A widow from the war." He nodded slowly, a plan forming, hard and clear. "Pike uses paper law to steal. We will use paper law to stop him." He looked at Evelyn. "We will go to Fort Ellison. You will file your claim for your school. And I," he said, his voice dropping, "will file a claim for the water that belongs to my people." It was a crazy idea, an Indian filing a claim against a white railroad man. But as she looked at him, she saw the iron certainty in his face. He believed it. The storm had passed. The rain softened to a whisper. In the distance, the sharp, barking cry of a coyote echoed off the bluffs. Little Fox was already asleep, wrapped in his blanket. Tahan sat by the fire, taking the first watch. He did not tell her to sleep. He simply tended the fire, his rifle across his knees, a solid, unmovable presence. Evelyn pulled the damp wool cloak tight. It smelled of him, of wood smoke and horse and rain. She lay on the dry rock, her back to the wall of the cave, the fire warming her face. She watched him, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes never left the darkness outside the shelter. She was a bought woman. She was a runaway. She was cold and wet and hunted, but for the first time since she had arrived in this God-forsaken land. She was not afraid. She closed her eyes, and, protected by the circle of his fire, she slept. Fort Ellison was not a saloon town. It was built of gray stone and sober intention, its wide main street cleared of scrub and marked by a 2-story courthouse. The flag that flew from its roof was clean, snapping against a pale sky that had been washed by the storm. The air smelled of milled lumber, coal smoke, and the faint, acidic tang of the telegraph office. It felt like a place where paper mattered more than pistols. The ride had taken them 2 hard days, avoiding the main trails, pushing the horses. Tahan had set a fast pace, stopping only to rest the animals. They were all exhausted, but the news from the Canadian River had lit a cold fire in him. He rode in first, his face a mask. Little Fox was beside him, his eyes wide, taking in the size of the stone buildings. Evelyn followed. She still wore Tahan's cloak, but she had washed her face and hands at their last camp, and braided her hair. She felt the stares as they dismounted at the public hitching rail. The people here were not the drunken, leering crowd of her uncle's settlement. They were merchants, freighters, and soldiers' wives in clean dresses. Their stares were cold, quiet, and sharp with judgment. A Comanche warrior, his hair in braids, followed by a white woman who looked like a captive. The whispers began before they had even tied the reins. The courthouse was cool inside. The air still. It smelled of floor wax, dry paper, and the sharp scent of an inkwell. A deputy with a drooping mustache looked up from his desk, his eyes lingering on Tahan's knife, then on Evelyn. "We are here to see Judge Boone," Evelyn said, her voice sounding small in the high-ceilinged room. The deputy grunted and jerked his thumb toward a heavy oak door. "She is in—" Judge Margaret Boone was bent over a ledger, a steel nib pen scratching across the page. She was a small woman, dressed in a practical black dress that had seen no fashion in at least 10 years. Her graying hair was pulled back in a bun so tight it seemed to pull the skin taut across her cheekbones. She had been a widow since the war, a fact that seemed to radiate from her like a chill. Her office was neat, organized, and contained nothing soft. She did not look up immediately. She finished her line of script, carefully blotted the ink, and only then did she set the pen down and raise her head. Her eyes were a pale, faded blue, and they took in everything in a single, comprehensive glance. She saw Tahan, his height, the way he stood with a coiled stillness, a warrior in a room of paper. She saw Evelyn, the exhaustion under her eyes, the fine cotton dress stained from the river, the heavy wool cloak clutched around her. She saw little Fox, who was trying to make himself invisible by the door. "Judge Boone," Evelyn began. "I am aware," the judge said. Her voice was crisp, clear, and carried no hint of welcome. "The telegraph wire brought the news from Sweetwater Creek this morning, Mr. Doyle's version of it, and an hour ago, a writer brought a petition from Mr. Everett Pike's attorney. It claims kidnapping, coercion, and theft of property. The property, I assume, being you, young woman." Tahan spoke. His voice was low, and it seemed to soak up the small sounds in the room. "There was no kidnap. There was a paper," Judge Boone said, tapping a document on her desk. Evelyn recognized the preacher's sloppy stamp. A temporal marriage contract filed by Circuit Preacher Sims, highly irregular, and, given that Owen Doyle was settling a gambling debt to Mr. Pike, highly suspect. She fixed her gaze on Evelyn. "Mr. Pike's lawyer is demanding an annulment on the grounds of coercion. He claims you were forced into this arrangement." The judge leaned forward. "Were you, child? You are in a court of law now. You are safe here. You tell me the truth. Were you forced?" This was the moment. Evelyn felt Tahan's presence beside her, but he was silent. He did not look at her. He was giving her the choice, just as he had at the saloon. She could say yes. She could say she was forced. The paper would be torn up. She would be free. A cold dread settled in her stomach. Free meant being a ward of the court. Free meant being sent back east, or worse, held here until her uncle, or Pike, could find another way to claim her. It was no freedom at all. She lifted her chin. "Your Honor, my uncle placed me in a situation where I had no choice. He intended to sell me to the highest bidder. That was the coercion." "And Mr. Tahan," the judge pressed. "Mr. Tahan," Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength, "paid my uncle's debt. He offered me protection." She took a breath. "I signed that paper of my own free will. It was the only choice I had, and I made it." Judge Boone held her gaze for a long, heavy minute. The judge had seen liars, and she had seen the terrified. This girl was neither. She was telling a careful, calculated truth. "You are claiming this contract is valid," the judge stated. "I am." Judge Boone tapped the petition from Pike's lawyer. "Then the claim of coercion is a civil dispute, not a criminal one. The contract, as irregular as it is, stands. For now." She folded her hands. "That settles the lawyer's complaint. It does not settle what you are doing in my office. What do you want?" Tahan stepped forward. "I have a claim." The judge's eyebrows shot up. This she had not expected. "A land claim." "A water claim?" Tahan said. "Cottonwood Springs. It belongs to the Numunu. My band. It has always been our water. Everett Pike is moving men to dam the springs. He is stealing our water to sell to the railroad." Judge Boone sighed, a long, weary sound. She looked from Tahan to Evelyn and back again. "Now we arrive at the root. Mr. Tahan, as you must know, tribal water rights are almost impossible to enforce, unless you have a specific federally ratified treaty that outlines those springs." "We do," Tahan said. "The Treaty of 1867. It promised us the Valley of the Cottonwood. The paper is at the agency in Fort Sill." The judge went very still. "A treaty, not just custom." She tapped her pen on the desk. That changes the legal framework, but Pike has possession. He is building now. A treaty injunction could take months to enforce. By then, the dam will be built, the water diverted, and the case will be lost." She turned her sharp eyes back to Evelyn. "And you, Miss Hart, or is it Mrs. Numu?" Evelyn felt a flush creep up her neck, but she ignored it. "I am here to file a claim for a school. Your Honor, a homestead claim, on the land near the old Mission Cross, for the purpose of establishing a school for the children of this territory." For the first time, the judge's expression softened. Just a fraction. "A school." She nodded. "Once. That, at least, is a claim I can process immediately." She stood. "Very well. You have made powerful enemies. That paper," she motioned to the marriage contract, "is the only legal defense you have. Judge Boone does not like Everett Pike, but he is a powerful man. He owns the territorial sheriff. Be careful." They left the courthouse and stood in the bright, hot sun. The town felt hostile. "We need supplies," Tahan said. "Powder, lead, flour." He led them away from the main street, to the smithy near the edge of town. The steady ring of a hammer on an anvil was a comforting, solid sound. The blacksmith was a large man named Severo, his face kind and creased by sun, his bare arms thick with muscle. He greeted Tahan in Spanish, with a grip of the forearm that spoke of long respect. Severo looked at Evelyn and Little Fox, then nodded. "Your arrival is loud news. Tahan." He spoke good English, with a soft accent. He pumped a dipper of fresh water from his well and offered it to Evelyn. She drank gratefully. "Judge Boone is a good woman," Severo said, turning back to his forge. "But she is one woman. Pike is a snake with many rattles. He has hired the Triangle Spur outfit to guard his construction. They are not cowboys. They are gunmen. Barton Hale leads them." "We know Hale," Tahan said, his voice flat. "They are moving fast," Severo said. He handed Tahan a heavy canvas bag. "Bullets, 30-30, and some for the Spencer. A gift." "We will pay," Tahan said. "No, you will not. Pike is trying to choke us all. He chokes your water. He chokes my freight prices." Severo looked grim. "You must be careful. They know you are here. They will not wait for the judge's paper." They found stalls for the horses at the livery. The owner, a nervous man, took Tahan's coin and made himself scarce. They could not afford a hotel, and Tahan would not sleep indoors. The hayloft was clean, dry, and defensible. As Tahan and Little Fox tended to the exhausted horses, Evelyn sat in the loft, the smells of hay and leather comforting. She watched Tahan moving in the stall below, his movements economical and gentle as he checked the mare's leg. She heard the whispers from the street again, the way the women had looked at her. Comanche's woman. She had saved her own safety, but she had stained his honor. When he climbed the ladder, his face set in thought. She was waiting. "Tahan." He stopped, turning, the light from the setting sun, streaming through the open loft door, lit one side of his face. "This paper," she said, pulling the contract from her pocket. "It is a lie, and it is a lie that hurts you." He watched her, his expression unreadable. "You told me," she went on, her voice low but intense. What it means. The gifts, the honor. What will your people think you traded 2 fine horses? Horses your band needs for me, a white woman. They will say you were fooled. They will say you shamed yourself. He was very still. He had been so focused on the water, on Pike, that he had not let himself think of this, of the return to his band. He saw the faces of the elders, their disappointment. "When I am safe," Evelyn said, pushing the words out. "When your water is safe, we must go back to the judge. We must tell her the truth, that it was a defense. We must annul it." He looked away from her, out the loft door, at the town settling into evening. He saw a man watching the livery from across the street, one of Pike's men. He was caught. His pride, his Numunu pride, was stung by her words. She was right, but his duty, his promise. He looked back at her. Her face was pale, serious. She was trying to protect him. "You are not safe," he said, his voice harsh. "Pike will not stop. The paper holds, until you are safe." "But your honor," she began. "My honor." Tahan cut her off, his voice sharp with an anger she did not understand. "Is my own. It is not for you to worry about." He turned his back on her, a sharp, clear dismissal, and walked to the far side of the loft, staring out into the dusk. He was angry that she was right, and he was angry at the sudden, cold spike of fear he felt at her words, "We must annul it." Night fell completely. Little Fox made a small, cold camp in the loft, and they ate dried venison and hardtack. The boy fell asleep quickly, wrapped in a blanket. Evelyn sat, her back against a hay bale, the tension between her and Tahan a thick, uncomfortable silence. Tahan took the first watch. He stood at the open loft door, a rifle in his hand, a silhouette against the starry sky. Hours passed. Evelyn dozed, but did not truly sleep. She woke to a sound, a boot scraping on the gravel outside. It was not the town drunk. It was a measured, careful sound. She sat up. "Tahan," she whispered. He was gone from the doorway. He was below, in the stable. She heard one of the horses nicker, a low, nervous sound. Evelyn crawled to the edge of the loft and looked down through the gaps in the floorboards. In the dim light from a single lantern, she saw Tahan, standing by his stud stall, his head tilted, listening. Then she saw the shadow. It detached itself from the deeper blackness by the tack room. A man, moving with a predator's silence. Barton Hale. He held a long knife, its blade catching a sliver of moonlight. He was not here for the horses. He was here to end the lawsuit before it began. Evelyn's breath caught. She opened her mouth to scream. Hale lunged. Tahan spun, not toward Hale, but away, rolling behind the horse. The paint stud screamed, lashing out with its hind legs, kicking the stall door off its hinges. Hale jumped back, the horse separating them. "Coward!" Hale hissed. "Hiding behind a horse." "Tahan!" Evelyn screamed. Little Fox was instantly awake, grabbing his rifle. Tahan used the chaos. He burst from the other side of the stall, not with his gun, but with his knife. He was inside Hale's guard before the gunman could react. This was not a gunfight. It was a brawl. Hale was strong. He dropped his knife and grabbed Tahan's wrist, slamming him back against a support beam. The wood cracked. Tahan grunted, driving his knee into Hale's thigh. Hale roared, bringing his fist down on Tahan's shoulder. They were locked, straining, a fight of pure, brutal strength. Hale got his arm free and drove a hard punch into Tahan's ribs. Tahan staggered, and Hale drew a second, smaller knife from his boot. He lunged. Tahan twisted, but the blade was fast. It sliced across his forearm, a deep, hot line of pain. "No!" Evelyn cried. She looked around, desperate. She grabbed a heavy wooden feed bucket and hurled it down. It struck Hale on the shoulder. He cursed, looking up, his concentration broken for a single second. It was all Tahan needed. He drove forward, ignoring the pain in his arm, and slammed his head into Hale's face. There was a crack of bone. Hale bellowed, stumbling back, clutching his nose. Tahan did not follow. He was breathing hard, blood dripping from his arm onto the hay. Hale looked at him, his eyes black with hatred. He saw Little Fox in the loft, leveling the rifle. Hale spat a mouthful of blood. "This is not over." He vanished, a shadow slipping out the back door. The stable was filled with the panic of the horses. Evelyn scrambled down the ladder. Tahan was leaning against the beam, his face pale. Blood was running freely from his arm. "He is hurt," she said, her voice shaking. "Little Fox, the water skin, bring the lantern." "It is nothing," Tahan said through gritted teeth. "Sit down," Evelyn commanded, pushing at his good shoulder. To her own surprise, he sat heavily on a feed sack. She ripped a long, clean strip from her petticoat. Her hands were shaking, but her mind was cold and clear. She poured water over the gash, washing away the horsehair and dirt. Tahan hissed, his whole body tensing, but he did not pull away. She wrapped the cloth tightly, her fingers pressing hard against his skin. It was warm, alive. "Severo was right," Tahan said, his voice quiet, ragged. "I did not watch my back." "You are alive," she said, tying the knot. Her fingers brushed his skin. "He will try again." Tahan looked at the white bandage on his dark arm. "You are not afraid of blood?" "My mother was sick for a long time," Evelyn said, her voice small. I learned to do what needs to be done. It is better than screaming." He nodded. He looked at the floor, at the dark splashes of his own blood in the hay. "My grandmother," he said, so quietly she had to lean in to hear him, "taught me to keep the fire. Before I could hunt, before I could ride in war, I learned to keep the coal safe, to wrap it in dry moss and carry it. She said fire is life. It is harder to keep than to make, harder to protect." He looked up at her, his dark eyes intense. "You kept the fire tonight." Before she could speak, before she could even understand the weight of his words, there was a desperate scrambling at the front stable door. It was not Hale. A boy, a Numunu boy, fell into the stable. He was caked in mud, his pony collapsing at the rail. He had ridden from the valley without stopping. "Tahan!" he gasped, scrambling to his feet when he saw him. Tahan was instantly standing, his wound forgotten. "What is it?" "They are here!" the boy cried, his voice breaking with fear and exhaustion. "Pike's men, they came this morning, wagons, 20, maybe 30 men, with rifles. They are blocking the pass to the springs. They will not let the band near the water." Tahan's face went blank. "And Tahan," the boy choked out, "they have axes. They are cutting the cottonwood trees. They have started to build the dam." The news hit Tahan like a second blow from Hale's fist. Cutting the cottonwoods, damming the springs. He was too late. The cold fury from the night before solidified into a block of ice in his chest. His arm throbbed. A dull fire. But he ignored it. "He is moving too fast," Tahan said. The words were flat, hard. "The judge's paper is too slow. The water will be dead by the time her court order arrives." "What do we do?" Evelyn's voice was quiet, steady. She was not panicking. She was watching him, her eyes clear. "We ride," he said. He turned to the young rider, who was gulping down water Severo had brought. "Rest, eat, tell no one we have left." He turned to Little Fox. "Saddle the paint and the mare. The boy's pony is finished. We take Severo's mule for the supplies." "We," Evelyn said. Tahan looked at her. "Pike's men are at the springs. Hale is here. This town is a trap. You are not safe here." "I am not a warrior," she said, her chin lifting. "I will slow you down." "You have paper," he said, touching the pocket where she kept the homestead application and the marriage contract. Judge Boone respects paper. My band has a treaty, but it is at Fort Sill. Your claim is here. You are the only paper we have that can stop him." A new understanding passed between them. This was no longer just about his water, or her school. The two claims were now one. "I will need to write," she said, her mind moving quickly. "I need to document what we see, the number of men, the tools, the destruction of the trees. An affidavit. Judge Boone will need proof." "Good," Tahan said. "You will be our memory. You will be the tongue for the paper." She went to her saddlebags, which Severo had brought from the livery. She pulled out a small, leather-bound book and a pencil. "I can map the trail. I can draw what they are building. I can advise you on the supply lines, how they are feeding that many men. That is what my father taught me. Logistics. A school needs supply lines, too." Tahan nodded. A new respect was dawning. She was not a burden. She was a different kind of weapon. He turned to Little Fox. "You will be my eyes. I will be the teeth. And she," he gestured to Evelyn, "will be the voice that speaks to the judge." Severo pressed a final bag into Tahan's hand. "This is not just bullets. It is blasting powder. From the new mine. Enough to move rocks or a bad dam." Tahan looked at the smith. "You are a good friend, Severo." "Go with God," Severo said, making a quick sign, "but ride like the devil." They slipped out the back of the smithy, using the alleyways, and were on the trail before the town was fully awake, riding not for the main pass, but for the high, broken country to the north. Tahan knew a path, a high, narrow trail used by his people for generations, a secret goat track that was invisible from the valley floor. They rode hard for 2 days, pushing into a rising wind that whipped the grit into their faces. The land grew steeper, more hostile. They were in the high mesas, a world of stone and sky. Tahan's arm was a constant, throbbing pain, but he did not slow. On the third morning, they reached the pass. It was a narrow split in the rock, barely wide enough for a single horse. The wind howled through it, a high, screaming sound. Tahan dismounted. "We walk from here," he said. "The wind is good. It hides our sound, but it is also bad." He pointed. Evelyn's eyes followed his finger. Strung between 2 low bushes, almost invisible, was a thin piece of wire. Attached to it were 3 small, copper bells. "Trip wires," Tahan said. "Hale's men. They are guarding the pass." Evelyn's heart sank. "So we cannot get through." "We get through," Tahan said. He looked at Little Fox. "You take the horses. Go back half a mile. Find cover. Wait. If we are not back by sundown, you ride to the band. Tell them to fight." Little Fox looked terrified, but he nodded. His face was pale. "I will wait, Tahan." "No," Evelyn said. "He should not wait. It is too dangerous." "He will wait," Tahan said. He turned and looked at Evelyn. "The pass is a mile long. It is narrow. The rocks are loose. Your skirts will catch. You cannot do this alone." "Then I will," she began. "He will carry you," Little Fox said, his voice quiet. Evelyn stared at him, then at Tahan. "Your arm. You are wounded." "My legs are strong," Tahan said. "It is the only way. We must be silent, and we must be fast." He turned his back to her and knelt. "Climb on, hold tight, and do not make a sound." She hesitated. This was an intimacy that went beyond anything she had imagined. To cling to him, to press her body against his. But she saw the hard resolve in his face. She saw the bells glinting in the pale light. She hiked her skirts and climbed onto his back. He grunted as her weight settled, his wounded arm tensing. She looped her arms around his neck, trying to be as small as possible. Her face pressed against his shoulder. He smelled of sweat, dust, and the faint, metallic tang of blood from his bandage. He stood. He moved into the pass, his moccasins silent on the rock. Evelyn held her breath. Every step was a careful, measured placement of his foot. He navigated the loose scree, his body tensing as he shifted her weight to favor his good arm. The wind howled around them, a screaming chorus that mercifully swallowed the sound of their breathing and the pounding of her heart. He stepped over the first wire. He ducked under a low overhang. She could feel the muscles in his back, hard as old wood. Straining, she could feel his warmth, the steady beat of his heart against her chest. She was completely, utterly dependent on him. Her life was in his hands. Halfway through, he stumbled. A rock slipped. He grunted, catching himself on his wounded arm. A sharp, pained hiss escaped his teeth. Evelyn felt him tremble, a violent shudder of agony, but he did not fall. He held her. "I am sorry," she whispered into his ear. "I am too heavy." "Be still," he commanded, his voice a tight rasp. He waited a moment, his breath coming in harsh gasps. Then he moved on. It took an hour of her clinging to him, of him bearing her weight, every step a silent agony. When they finally reached the far side, he almost fell, setting her down on a flat ledge. He collapsed against the rock wall, his eyes closed, his face beaded with sweat and gray with pain. His arm was bleeding again. A fresh, dark stain was spreading on the white bandage. "You are hurt," she said, her voice shaking with guilt and a sudden, fierce protectiveness. She scrambled to her saddlebag, which he had slung over his own shoulder. She pulled out her waterskin and a fresh strip of cloth. "It is nothing," he said, but his voice was weak. "Be still," she said, echoing his own command. She unwrapped the bloody bandage. The wound was torn open, angry and red. She poured precious water over it, cleaning it as gently as she could. He watched her, his dark eyes shadowed with pain. "You should have left me," she said, her voice thick. "I slowed you down. I am a burden." He was quiet for a long time, watching her fingers as she tied the new knot. "When you spoke," he said at last, his voice low, "in the stable, about the paper, about my honor." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "You were right," he said. "My people would not understand. I traded our horses. For a white woman, they would see weakness." "That is why we must annul it," she whispered. "When this is over, to restore your name." He looked away, out over the valley. They were high enough now to see the springs, a dark patch of green, miles distant. They could see the smoke from Pike's camp. "When you said that," he said, "I was angry. Not because you were right. I was angry because the thought of ending it, of you leaving—" He stopped. He could not find the words. He had never spoken like this. Evelyn stared at him. The wind whipped her hair across her face. You did not want me to go." "I told you I bought protection," he said, looking back at her, his eyes intense. "It was a lie." "A lie?" "It was a half-truth," he said, his voice rough. "I bought you to stop Pike. I bought you because what they were doing was wrong. But when you followed me out, when you rode through the storm, I did not want to let you go." He looked at his bandaged arm. "And now, I cannot." Evelyn felt her heart stop, then start again, a painful, heavy beat. She began. "I am so afraid. Not of Hale, not of Pike. I am afraid of being owned, of being a thing, a piece of property. Like that night, my whole life, I have been collateral for someone else's debts." "You are not property," he said, his voice fierce. He reached out, his good hand, and his fingers brushed her cheek. It was the lightest touch, but it burned like a brand. "You are not a debt." They stayed like that, frozen, high on the mountain pass, the wind howling their secrets away. They moved on, slower now, descending into the hidden valley of the Cottonwood Springs. Tahan found a small, sheltered hollow, a pocket of silence away from the wind, where a few ancient, massive cottonwood trees had escaped the axe. They could hear it now. The rhythmic, brutal thud of axes on wood, and the distant shouts of men. They were close, too close. Tahan built a tiny, smokeless fire, using dry, seasoned wood he pulled from a hollow log. It was a risk, but they were freezing, and he needed to heat broth. His wound and the exertion had left him weak. They sat side by side, close, sharing a blanket. Evelyn held a tin cup of hot broth to his lips. He drank, his eyes on her. The firelight flickered, catching the exhaustion and the pain in his face. His hand, the good one, lay on his knee, inches from hers. Evelyn looked at his hand. It was strong, calloused, but it was trembling. From the cold, from the pain, from the confession on the mountain. She saw the scar on his knuckle, white against his dark skin. Without thinking, moved by an impulse she did not understand, she reached out. She laid her fingers gently on the back of his hand, her touch brushing the scar. His hand stopped trembling. He went utterly still. He turned his palm up, his fingers sliding between hers, lacing them together. His hand was rough, but it was burning hot. He did not speak. He just looked at her, and his breath was suddenly harsh in the quiet. She saw it in his eyes. The banked fire, the same intensity he had when he watched the horizon, was now focused on her. It was a hunger and a fear and a deep, aching desire that had nothing to do with ownership. "Evelyn," he whispered. His voice was thick. He leaned closer. She did not pull away. She leaned toward him. "I promised I would not touch you," he breathed, his lips inches from hers. "I am not afraid," she whispered back. "Until you say stop," he vowed, his voice a low, rough promise. "I will stop." "Do not stop," she said. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was deep and desperate and raw. It was the wind and the river and the fear and the fire. It was all the words they could not say. It was a claiming, but not of ownership. It was a claiming of shared fate. He kissed her until she was breathless, his good arm wrapping around her, pulling her close against his side, shielding her from the cold, from the world. He held her like that, their foreheads pressed together, their breathing ragged. The sound of the axes seemed to fade. There was only the sound of the fire, and their hearts, and the promise. He kissed her again, slower this time, a deep exploration, and when she shivered, he pulled the blanket tighter around them both, and the small fire burned low. When Evelyn woke, the sun was just beginning to touch the highest peaks. She was alone under the blanket. For a panicky second, she thought he was gone. Then she saw him, standing at the edge of the hollow, watching the valley below. He had built a small pyramid of stones near the dead fire, 4 flat, gray stones, stacked in a way that looked permanent, a marker. She went to stand beside him. He did not look at her, but she felt the change. The space between them was no longer empty. "Good morning," she said quietly. He nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "Good morning, Evelyn." She looked down at the valley. Pike's camp was fully visible now, a raw scar of mud, felled trees, and tents. Men were moving, organized, purposeful. They were not just building a dam, they were building a fortress. "We cannot stop that," she said, her heart sinking. "Not just the two of us." "No," Tahan agreed. "Breaking the tools is not enough. They will just bring more." "What is in that main tent?" she asked, pointing. "The largest tent, set apart, with 2 guards. "That is where Hale is," Tahan said, "and Pike, when he visits." Little Fox appeared, emerging silently from the rocks above them. He had been scouting. "I got close," he whispered, his eyes bright with adrenaline. "I heard them," Hale was angry. He was shouting at a man in a suit. He said the ledgers were not safe in the wagon. He moved a metal lockbox into that tent. He said all the contracts, all the bribe lists are in it. Tahan and Evelyn looked at each other. "That is it," Evelyn said, her voice electric. "That is the proof. The forged contracts. The list of who Pike has paid. If we can get that box to Judge Boone, she can send the marshals." Tahan finished. She can stop him with his own law. The plan shifted, became harder, more dangerous. It was no longer about sabotage. It was about theft. "We need to get that box," Tahan said. "Tonight." He was looking down at the camp, his face set, planning. Evelyn was watching him, a new, fierce pride in her heart. A single sharp sound echoed up the canyon. A rifle shot. It was not a hunting shot. It was a signal. Tahan grabbed her, pulling her back behind the rocks. Little Fox dropped flat. A shout came from the camp below. A man was pointing, up toward their position. Then a second shot, this one from the pass behind them, the one they had just come through. The bullet ricocheted off the rock, inches from Tahan's head, sending stone chips flying. Hale's voice roared, impossibly close. "They are pinned. Boys, they are right where I wanted them." The trap was sprung. The bullet strike was a high, sharp crack, followed by the whine of ricochet. Stone chips, hard as bee stings, sprayed Tahan's cheek. He grabbed Evelyn, pulling her down into the hollow, shouting down just as Little Fox flattened himself against the rock. Hale's voice echoed from the pass behind them, triumphant and cruel. "Right where I wanted you pinned." Tahan pinned like a rabbit in a snare. A second volley of shots erupted, this one from the camp below them. Pike's men, alerted by the signal shot, were firing up the slope. They were caught in a pincer. The high goat track was a shooting gallery, and they were the targets. "He herded us." Tahan spat, his voice thick with fury at his own mistake. He had seen the tripwires, but he had not seen the flankers hidden in the rocks above the pass. "Give up the woman." Tahan, Hale roared, his voice closer now. "Pike wants his collateral, and he wants those studs you stole whistle for your horse, and throw her out, and I might let the boy live." Bullets kicked up dust, slamming into the rocks around their tiny shelter. There was no escape. Suddenly, the gunfire from below intensified. It was not random firing. It was a heavy, covering volley. Evelyn looked, her heart seizing. 3 men were scrambling up the rocks from the left, using the steep angle as cover, flanking them. Tahan spun, bringing his rifle up. He fired once. A man screamed and tumbled back down the scree, but the other 2 were too close. They burst into the hollow. Tahan was on them, his knife in his good hand, but one man was huge, a freighter, and he ignored Tahan. He lunged for Evelyn. She screamed as his massive, grimy hand clamped onto her arm, hauling her to her feet. "Got her, boss," he bellowed. Tahan turned to lunge, but a bullet from Hale's rifle slammed into the rock where his head had been. He was forced back. "No!" he roared, a sound of pure, primal fury. Evelyn was dragged from the shelter, a human shield. The man twisted her arm, forcing her to her knees in the open. A second man, his face thin and cruel, bound her hands in front of her with a short, rough pigging rope. Barton Hale appeared on the ridge above them, not 50 yards away. His rifle was steady on Tahan's chest. His face, in the clear morning light, was a swollen mask, his nose a dark, broken ruin from Tahan's headbutt. "Well," Hale said, his voice a soft, venomous drawl, "this simplifies things. Throw down your rifle, Tahan, and the boys, or I'll have him gut her right here." Tahan was frozen. He looked at Evelyn. Her face was white with terror, but she was not crying. She was watching him. "Do it," she said, her voice a strained whisper. "Do not let him kill you." "Throw it down," Hale barked. Slowly, His eyes locked on Hale. Tahan placed his rifle on the ground. "Let her go. All of it," Hale commanded. "The knife and the boy's rifle. Kick them over here." Tahan unbuckled his knife belt. Little Fox, his face pale and sick, added his rifle to the pile. Tahan kicked them away. "Good," Hale said, a cold smile twisting his broken face. "Now, the horse. Pike wants his stud. Whistle." Tahan stood, his hands empty. He was exposed. He looked at Evelyn, then at Hale. He put his fingers to his lips. He let out the low, sharp whistle he used to call his paint. Hale and his men looked toward the pass, expecting the horse to appear. The wind, Tahan noted, was still strong, blowing from the hollow, up the pass, directly toward Hale. "He is coming," Tahan said, while Hale's eyes, and the eyes of the man holding Evelyn, were on the pass. Tahan moved. It was not a fast move. It was a fluid drop of his hand to the small, smoldering fire. He grabbed the small leather pouch from his belt, the dried chilies. "What is he?" the thin man began. Tahan threw the pouch onto the coals. For a second, nothing happened. Then the dry leather and the brittle peppers caught. A cloud of thick, pungent, yellow-brown smoke billowed up. It was not wood smoke. It was a choking, acrid cloud of pure, weaponized capsaicin. The wind caught it instantly, funneling the blinding smoke directly up the slope. The effect was instantaneous. The men on the ridge screamed. It was not a sound of pain. It was a sound of agony. They dropped their rifles, clawing at their faces. "My eyes, God Almighty, my eyes." "What is it?" Hale roared, choking, his own vision dissolving in a flood of tears. He fired his rifle blind, the shot going wild. The man holding Evelyn cursed, turning his face away. His eyes squeezed shut, but he kept his grip on her. "Now, Little Fox," Tahan bellowed. He dove, not for his rifle, but for Hale. He grabbed a heavy piece of firewood as he moved, a makeshift club. Hale, blinded, heard him coming. He dropped his rifle and pulled his knife, slashing wildly in the smoke. "I will kill you, you savage!" Tahan did not go for the knife. He ran past Hale, disappearing into the choking cloud, moving down the slick, muddy slope toward the dam, toward the main camp. Hale, coughing and spitting, stumbled after him, knowing Tahan was his only target. The battle had split. Above, Little Fox had grabbed his own rifle. He was exchanging shots with the remaining Triangle spur men, who were firing sporadically from the ridge. Evelyn was still on her knees, her guard temporarily blinded. His eyes clamped shut as he tried to wipe the fire from them. "You stay put, you—" he gasped. Evelyn did not hesitate. Her hands were bound, but her teeth were free. She lunged forward and bit down on the man's hand, his grip on her arm. She bit with all the terror and fury in her, her teeth sinking to the bone. He shrieked, a high, thin sound, and his hand flew back, releasing her. He raised his fist to smash her face, but she was already moving. She scrambled, still on her knees, toward a pile of construction supplies. Her eyes landed on a heavy iron saddle hook. She grabbed it, the cold metal a solid, terrible weight in her bound hands. The man, howling, wiping blood and tears from his face, turned back to her. "You little—" She swung the hook, a desperate, two-handed arc. It connected with his knee. The sound was a wet, sickening crunch. He collapsed, screaming, clutching his shattered leg. A second man, recovering from the smoke, staggered into view, his rifle coming up. He aimed it directly at Evelyn. She froze, the hook useless, her life over. A single shot cracked from the ridge above. The man spun, a look of surprise on his face, and fell backward. "Little Fox." "Evelyn, the horses, they are here." He was riding. He had circled around during the chaos and retrieved the horses. He came thundering down the slope on his pony, leading Tahan's paint and her mare. He swooped past the man Evelyn had crippled, his face a grim mask of war. "Grab on!" he yelled, holding out his arm. She ran, her hands still tied, and grabbed his forearm. He hauled her up, pulling her clear of the ground, half carrying her as he rode, shielding her with his own body as bullets from the camp below began to whine past them. Down at the springs, the fight was more primal. Tahan faced Hale on the muddy, half-finished earthwork dam. The ground was slick, treacherous. The water, his water, was already pooling behind the wall of dead cottonwoods, a dark, lifeless mirror. Hale, his eyes red and streaming but his vision clearing, circled, his knife held low. "You should have stayed in town. Comanche." Tahan held his club of firewood. His wounded arm was a blaze of agony, but the adrenaline was a cold river in his veins. "The water is not yours." Hale lunged. Tahan swung the club, catching Hale's knife arm. The impact sent the knife flying, but Hale was strong. He crashed into Tahan, his weight carrying them both down into the sucking mud. They rolled, punching, gouging. This was not a fight. It was a brawl. Hale was heavier, his fists like stones. He got on top, his knee grinding into Tahan's chest, his hands closing around Tahan's throat. "Pike sends his—" Hale gasped, squeezing. Tahan's vision began to gray. He could not breathe. He was pinned. With his last strength, he hooked his leg around Hale's, finding purchase in the mud, and twisted. A desperate, violent move. Hale was thrown off balance. His grip loosened. Tahan squirmed free, gasping. Coming up onto his knees, Hale charged again, this time unarmed. A bull roaring in for the kill. Tahan did not try to meet him. He ducked low, grabbing Hale's arm as he passed, and used the gunman's own momentum to spin him, slamming him face first into the hard-packed clay of the new dam. Hale hit with a sickening thud and lay still. Tahan, breathing in harsh, ragged gasps, pushed himself to his feet. He had won. He had not killed him. He had simply ended him. He heard the thunder of hooves. He heard Evelyn scream his name. "Tahan." He turned, a grim, exhausted smile touching his lips. He saw her, riding with Little Fox, safe. He saw the water, and he looked at the ugly, scarred earthwork that held it captive. Suddenly, a new sound, deeper than gunfire, rumbled from beneath his feet. A low, muffled boom. The ground shuddered. Tahan stared, stunned, at the base of the dam. A geyser of mud, rock, and water erupted from the earth. Severo. The blasting powder, the smith must have followed them, taken the long way, and set his charge. The dam wall held for a long, groaning second. The pooled water pressed against it. Then, with a sound like a giant tearing the world in half, the earthwork gave way. The water of Cottonwood Springs, the life of his people, burst free. It was not a flood. It was an avalanche of pure, roaring life. It surged forward, a brown, angry torrent, 10 feet high. It smashed into Pike's camp with the force of a locomotive. Tents, wagons, tools, the felled trees, the stacks of supplies, all were swept away in a single, terrifying, cleansing wave. The illegal work was obliterated. Pike's men, those not swept away, were screaming, scrambling for high ground. Their fight forgotten, their fortress was gone, destroyed by the very thing they had tried to cage. "Tahan." Evelyn was sliding from the horse, running toward him, her hands still bound. He turned to her, the smile still on his face. He watched the water. "It is free," he said. Then she saw his face. It was not muddy, it was pale, a ghostly gray under his skin. He looked down at his shoulder, his left shoulder. A dark, spreading stain was soaking his shirt. During the fight, a bullet, or Hale's knife, he did not know. It was high, near the collarbone, a bad wound. He swayed. He looked at the free, roaring water. Then he looked at her. "Evelyn," he whispered. He crumpled, collapsing into the mud. "No!" she screamed, a sound torn from her soul. She ran, sliding, falling, catching herself, until she reached him. She cradled his head in her lap. "Little fox, the bandages, get the bandages." He was breathing, but it was a shallow, faint rasp. His eyes were closed. She fumbled with her bound hands. "The rope, cut the rope." Little Fox was beside them, his face a mask of terror. He slashed the rope on her wrists with his knife. She ripped open Tahan's shirt. The bullet hole was small and dark, and it was bleeding, a steady, pulsing flow. She pressed her hands to the wound, trying to stop the blood, trying to push her own life into him. "Stay with me," she commanded, her voice breaking. "You cannot leave. Do you hear me? I will not let you." She looked at his face, so still. The lines of pain eased in unconsciousness. The fear she felt was a cold, black ocean, a terror that went beyond anything she had ever known. It was not the fear of a captive. It was the absolute, hollow terror of loss. In that moment, her hands covered in his hot blood, the roaring river a backdrop. She knew. The paper, the protection, the shame, the honor, it was all just noise. This man, his life, was now her own. She loved him. The realization was as violent and as liberating as the water bursting its dam. "You stay," she whispered, her tears washing trails in the mud on her face. "I chose you, Tahan. You do not get to leave." Hale groaned from the mud, stirring. Little Fox, his face grim, walked over. He picked up Hale's pistol, checked it, and then used the same rope that had bound Evelyn to tie Hale's hands. Tight. "He is finished," the boy said, his voice flat. Evelyn's mind, sharp with adrenaline, remembered. The lockbox, her hand stained red. She went to the unconscious gunman. She searched his pockets, his vest. There, on a chain around his neck, tucked under his shirt, a small, heavy iron key. "The key," she breathed, holding it up. "Little Fox, we have the key." A low rumble filled the air. It was not the river. It was thunder. Dark, bruised clouds were rolling in, covering the sun. Tahan's eyes fluttered. He looked up, his gaze finding her. "Evelyn." "I am here," she said, her voice thick. "I am here. The water is free, and we have the key." He nodded, a tiny, pained movement. Little Fox suddenly stiffened. He stood, looking north. Not at the camp, but at the high, distant ridge that marked the far side of their valley. "Tahan," he said, his voice suddenly breaking, soft with awe. "Look." On the highest peak, a pinprick of light flared, then another, beside it, a signal fire. Tahan turned his head, a slow, agonizing movement. He saw it. "They see," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "The band, they see the water. It has returned." The thunder rolled again, a long, deep drumbeat over the valley, and the first clean drop of rain fell, landing on Tahan's face. The ride back to Fort Ellison was a blur of misery. Severo had met them near the pass, as planned, his face grim as he took in the scene. Tahan, half-conscious, bleeding, Hale, bound and sullen, the water roaring free. He had a small buckboard wagon hidden in a ravine. They loaded Tahan into the back, Evelyn climbing in beside him, her hands pressed tight against the makeshift bandage on his shoulder, trying to staunch the blood that pulsed with every jolt of the wagon. Little Fox and Severo rode the horses, pushing them hard, while Hale, his feet bound, was tied to the wagon axle, forced to walk, stumble, and curse through the thickening mud. The rain began in earnest, a cold, driving storm that turned the world to a gray, streaming curtain. Tahan was burning with fever, his quiet, pained breathing the only sound Evelyn focused on. She tore more strips from her petticoat, packing the wound, her mind a cold, hard knot of fear. They arrived in Fort Ellison hours after midnight, a ghost wagon slipping through deserted, muddy streets. They did not go to the courthouse. They went to the back of Severo's smithy, pulling the wagon into the darkness of the forge, the big doors groaning shut, cutting off the sound of the storm. "He needs a doctor," Evelyn said, her voice shaking as Severo brought a lantern. Tahan's face was a pale, waxy gray. "No," Severo said, his voice hard. "The doctor must report a gunshot. The sheriff works for Pike. He would arrest Tahan, or Pike's men would kill him in his cell. We do this ourselves." He heated his smallest branding iron in the forge until it glowed cherry red. Tahan's eyes fluttered open as Severo approached. "This will hurt," the smith said, his voice gentle. Tahan nodded. "Once." He looked at Evelyn. "Do not look." But she did. She held his good hand, gripping it with all her strength as Severo pressed the hot iron to the bleeding wound. Tahan did not scream. His whole body went rigid, a bowstring pulled to its limit, and a low groan was torn from his chest. The smell of seared flesh filled the smithy. He collapsed back, unconscious, but the bleeding had stopped. "Now," Severo said, his face grim. "The box." "It is not here," Tahan whispered. He had come to, his voice a dry rasp. "Hale moved it, back to town." Evelyn's hand, still sticky with his blood, went to her pocket. She pulled out the small, heavy key. "I have this, from Hale," he said. "The office, behind the mercantile." "The records warehouse," Severo breathed. "Pike's heart, all his paper." "We go now," Tahan said, trying to sit up. He fell back, a wave of dizziness and pain washing over him. "You will not," Evelyn commanded. She stood, her legs trembling but her voice iron. "You will stay. You will live. Little Fox and I will go." "No, it is locked, guarded," Severo said. "And you do not know the town. I will go. Little Fox, you stand guard. Evelyn, you watch him, and him." He jerked his head at Hale. "Who was tied to the anvil?" "I am going," Evelyn said. "I am the only one who knows what to look for. The forged contracts, the bribe lists. I am his wife. It is my right." Severo looked at her, at the blood on her dress, the fire in her eyes. He nodded. "Then we go together." The rain was a solid wall, turning the street into a river of mud. They moved like shadows, keeping to the alleyways. The records office was a small, stout brick building behind the main Pike mercantile, dark and silent. A single lock stood on the heavy door. Evelyn slid the key into the lock. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely turn it. Severo put his hand over hers, steadying her, and twisted. The tumblers clicked, a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the night. They slipped inside. The air was dry, still, smelling of old paper, ink, and the faintest scent of mice. Severo lit a tiny, shielded lantern. Rows of shelves stretched into the darkness, filled with ledgers and boxes. "It will be the metal box," Evelyn whispered. "The one from the tent." She saw it, on a large desk at the far end of the room. It was bigger than she remembered. She tried the key. It fit. She turned it, and the heavy lid creaked open. It was full. Ledgers, bundles of paper tied with ribbon, maps. "Hurry!" Severo urged, watching the street through the grimy window. Evelyn's fingers flew. She was not just a teacher. She was an accountant's daughter. She knew paper. She saw the map of Cottonwood Springs, with a red line marking a proposed pipeline to the railroad. She saw a thick document, Comanche Treaty Addendum, granting water rights. The signatures were crude forgeries. Names of elders she knew from Tahan were not there, replaced by marks. The price, $50 and 10 sacks of rotten flour. She dug deeper, a small, black ledger. She opened it. Her blood ran cold. It was a list of names and numbers. Sheriff Brody, Fort Ellison, $100. Oversight. Indian Agent Miles, Fort Sill, $200. Treaty access. It was all there. The entire conspiracy. "I have it," she breathed. "I thought I might find rats in my records." The voice, calm and amused, came from the doorway. Evelyn spun, her heart stopping. Everett Pike stood there. He was perfectly dry, his expensive suit untouched by the storm. He held a bright lantern, and behind him stood 2 uniformed soldiers, not deputies, their rifles held at the ready. "Mr. Pike!" Severo lunged, but one of the soldiers stepped forward and slammed his rifle butt into the smith's stomach. Severo folded, gasping. The wind knocked out of him. Pike smiled. "Stealing, Miss Hart. That is a federal offense, and you, Severo, aiding and abetting. A pity." His eyes moved past them, into the smithy, where Tahan was pushing himself into the doorway. His own rifle held one-handed, his face a mask of fevered agony. "Ah," Pike said, his smile widening. "The husband, come to protect his property." A soldier stepped forward, his target clear. Before Tahan could even raise the rifle, the soldier smashed the stock into his wounded left shoulder. Tahan cried out, a raw, broken sound, and fell to his knees. The rifle clattered on the stone floor. "Tahan!" Evelyn screamed, running to him. "Do not move," Pike commanded. The rifle muzzles of the 2 soldiers were steady, one on Evelyn, one on Severo. Pike walked into the room, stepping over Tahan as if he were a pile of rags. He nudged Tahan's leg with his polished boot. "You should have died in the hills. Comanche, you have cost me a great deal of money. My dam, my best foreman. And for what? A patch of mud." He looked at Tahan's contorted face, his expression one of pure, racial contempt. "You really think your red skin gives you any right to this land? This land belongs to men who build, men who have vision. You are a ghost, savage, a relic. You just do not know it yet. You are all ghosts." "Mr. Pike, that is quite enough." The voice was like a whip crack. Judge Margaret Boone stood in the main doorway, framed by the pouring rain. Her deputy, a lantern held high, was beside her, and behind her, Little Fox, his face set. Pike spun, his smile vanishing, replaced by a mask of polite outrage. "Judge, thank God, I have caught these thieves red-handed, breaking into my private office." "I was notified," Judge Boone said, her voice like ice, "of a disturbance, and I believe, Mr. Pike, that this office contains stolen property, namely government land and water rights, obtained by fraud." Pike laughed, a short, barking sound. "You have no proof, only the word of a savage and his runaway whore." "We have a witness," Judge Boone said. A new figure was pushed forward by the deputy. It was Running Wolf, the young Numunu rider, his face streaked with tears and rain, his hands bound. Tahan stared. "Running Wolf." The boy could not meet his eyes. He stared at the floor, his body shaking. I told them, Tahan," he whispered, his voice broken. "Pike's man. He came to the camp. After you left, he promised us flour, meat for the winter. He said you were bringing war on us. He gave me a gold coin. For my family." The betrayal hung in the air, thick and sick. "He told them where you went," Little Fox said, his voice flat with disgust. "He told them about the goat track." Tahan looked at the boy. He saw the terror, the shame, the crushing weight of hunger. He did not see a traitor. He saw a victim. He pushed himself up, leaning one-handed against the wall. "You were afraid," Tahan said, his voice quiet, ragged, but clear. You did what you thought would save your family. The gold is a lie, but the hunger was real. He looked at Running Wolf. There is no betrayal here, only a mistake. You are Numunu. You are my brother. Running Wolf let out a choked sob. This is absurd, Pike roared. Sentimental nonsense. The word of a traitorous Indian against a citizen. This is my property. Evelyn stepped forward. Her dress was ripped, stained brown with mud and dark red with Tahan's blood. Her hair was loose, plastered to her face, but her eyes were burning. I am not your property, Mr. Pike. Her voice cut through the room, sharp and clear. Everyone went silent, even the soldiers. I am not your collateral. I am not my uncle's asset. I am not a thing to be bought or sold or traded. She moved to Tahan's side, putting her hand on his good arm, steadying him. And he knows that this man, she said, her voice shaking but gaining power, has never once touched me without my permission. He has never once treated me as anything less than a human being, which is more than any civilized man in this room can say. The silence was profound. Judge Boone nodded. Once. I see. She stepped forward. Evelyn Hart, Tahan Numu, you are claiming that the contents of this box are evidence of fraud, bribery, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government and the Numunu people. We swear it, Evelyn said. Deputy, Boone commanded, take the box. She pulled a clean ledger from a shelf, opening it to a fresh page. I am taking your sworn affidavit, on this night, in this place. Her pen flew, Tahan Numu. Do you swear that the water of Cottonwood Springs is the ancestral right of your people, protected by the Treaty of 1867? I swear, Tahan said. Evelyn Hart, do you swear you witnessed the forgery and the bribery receipts in this lockbox, written by Mr. Pike or his agents? I swear. Sign, Boone said. Evelyn signed her name, clear and strong. Tahan took the pen in his left hand, his movements clumsy, and made his mark beside her signature. Boone lit a stick of red wax, dripped a heavy seal onto the page, and pressed her signet ring into it. Sealed, under the authority of the territorial court. This is a farce, Pike sputtered. You have nothing my word against theirs. We have more than their word, Mr. Pike. The deputy stepped aside. Barton Hale, soaked, bound, and broken, was shoved into the room. Hale looked at Pike, his eyes dead. He saw no rescue. He saw only the end. He knew Pike would let him hang. He told me, Hale said, his voice thick through his ruined nose. He told me to kill the Comanche. He told me to silence the girl permanently. You are facing a charge of attempted murder, Mr. Hale. Judge Boone said, your only hope is full cooperation. Where is the money? Hale looked at Pike, a single spark of hatred. He washes it, the railroad payoffs, gold. He buries it, under the floor of the old assay office, by the creek. He was going to run, after he sold the water. Deputy, Judge Boone said, her voice flat. Arrest Mr. Pike. The deputy pulled out his cuffs. Pike turned white. You cannot. I own this town. I own you. You own nothing, sir. The cuffs snapped shut. As the deputy pulled him toward the door, Pike stopped. He locked eyes with Evelyn. His face was a mask of pure, reptilian hatred. You, he hissed. You think you won. You are nothing. You are just the girl I let him buy. Tahan surged forward, a roar in his chest. But Evelyn put her hand on his good arm. She held him. She looked at Pike, her gaze steady, calm. I chose, she said. Pike was dragged out into the rain. The warehouse was suddenly, impossibly quiet. There was only the sound of Tahan's ragged breathing, and the steady, cleansing drum of the rain. The last word of Pike's curse was still hanging in the rain-slicked air when the night exploded. It was not a single shot. It was a volley, a crash of gunfire from the darkness at the end of the street. Glass shattered in the mercantile window. A bullet whined off the anvil where Hale was still tied, making the gunman scream in terror. "A triangle spur," the deputy yelled, shoving Pike hard toward the jailhouse. "They are freeing the boss." But they were not just firing. They were riding. A dozen men, maybe 15, spurred their horses into the main street, howling, their pistols blazing. They were not a disciplined unit. They were a drunken, leaderless mob, furious that their paymaster had been taken. A bullet tore through the deputy's leg. He went down, his rifle skittering across the mud. Pike, seeing his chance, broke free, scrambling into the dark alley between the mercantile and the assayer's office. "Severo!" Tahan roared. He was on his feet, his fever forgotten, his one good hand grabbing his rifle. "The church! Get them to the church!" The town erupted into chaos. Doors slammed, women screamed. Judge Boone, her face a mask of cold fury, dragged her wounded deputy behind a horse trough. She retrieved his shotgun. "The courthouse," she bellowed. "Barricade the courthouse." Severo grabbed Tahan, half lifting him. "You are in no shape." "I can stand," Tahan gritted, his face pale and slick with sweat and rain. He looked at Evelyn. "Go run." Evelyn did not run. She grabbed Tahan's other side, his good arm slung over her shoulder, taking his weight. "We go together." Little Fox provided cover, his Spencer rifle cracking, forcing two of the riders to scatter. They ran, a desperate, stumbling group, across the open street. Bullets tore the mud at their feet. They slammed through the heavy oak doors of the small stone church just as Severo and Little Fox hurled their weight against them, dropping the heavy iron bar into place. They were safe, but they were trapped. The church was dark, smelling of old wax, damp stone, and fear. A few women, the preacher's wife and the baker's daughters, were huddled in the front pews, weeping. "They cannot burn stone," Severo panted, checking the long windows. "But they can break the glass." "Then we make it a fort," said a new voice. An old man, his skin like dried leather, his hair in two long, graying braids, stepped from the vestry. He carried a carpenter's hammer. "2 logs," he said, nodding to Tahan. "I was fixing the roof leak. This is a bad night for it." 2 logs. Tahan greeted him, breathing hard. He leaned against the wall, the pain in his shoulder a white-hot fire. "The pews! We need barricades!" "Already done," 2 logs said. He pointed. The women, seeing the old Cheyenne carpenter take charge, had already helped him drag 2 of the heaviest pews, turning them on their sides to block the main doors, creating a second wall. "Evelyn," Tahan said, his voice tight. "The women, the back room, the vestry, tearcloth, we will have wounded." Evelyn nodded. Her fear was a cold, hard knot, but her hands were steady. She led the frightened women into the small room, pulling altar cloths and choir robes from a chest, tearing them into long, clean strips. Outside, the gunfire was continuous. The Triangle Spur men were riding up and down the street, shooting at the courthouse, and now, seeing where the fugitives had gone. At the church, stained glass exploded inward, showering the pews with colored fragments. "I need to see," Little Fox said. He looked up at the bell tower. A narrow ladder led into the darkness. "I can be their eyes." "It is a target," Tahan said, his voice a sharp command. "We are all targets," Little Fox replied, a new, hard maturity in his voice. He grabbed his rifle and was up the ladder before Tahan could protest. "Severo, the side door," Tahan ordered. "2 logs, the windows, block them." Tahan himself took a position near the front, his rifle resting on the back of a pew. He tried to aim, but the world was swimming. The fever was high, and his left arm was a useless, burning weight. "Tahan, you are bleeding again," Evelyn said, returning from the vestry. The cauterized wound had broken open from the run. "Later," he said. A man was hit in the street, a merchant, running from his store, clutching a cash box. He fell, crying out. "We have to get him," one of the young women, the baker's daughter, cried from the vestry door. "No," Severo shouted. "It is suicide." Before Tahan could speak, Evelyn was moving. "Keep them pinned," she shouted to Little Fox above. She cracked the side door, the one that led to the small cemetery. She did not run into the street. She ran low, using the tombstones as cover, circling behind the man. "Damn her," Severo hissed, providing covering fire from the window. Evelyn reached the man. He was hit in the leg. She grabbed him under the arms, dragging him back, stone by stone, toward the church. A bullet sang past her head. So close she felt the heat of it. She pulled him through the side door and slammed it shut, both of them collapsing onto the floor. "You are a fool," Tahan said, his voice thick with a terrifying relief. "I am a teacher," she panted, and went to work on the man's leg. From above, Little Fox's rifle spoke, sharp and regular. He was a good shot. He had driven the riders back from the church, forcing them to take cover across the street. "They are moving," he yelled down, "trying to get to the back." He leaned out too far. A rifle shot, heavier than the others, cracked from the roof of the mercantile. Little Fox made a sound, a short, sharp grunt, and he fell, tumbling from the ladder, crashing hard onto the stone floor below. "Little Fox!" Tahan roared. He started forward, but his legs buckled. Evelyn was there first. The boy was conscious, his face twisted in pain. He was clutching his side. It burns. Evelyn." She tore open his shirt. It was a long, bloody graze, a deep furrow of torn flesh along his ribs. It was bad, but it had missed his lungs. "Get him to the vestry," she commanded Severo. They carried him. Evelyn laid him on the preacher's cot. "Pressure, hold this," she told one of the women. She looked around, frantic. There was no doctor, no medicine. Her eyes landed on a barrel in the corner. "What is that?" "Flour," the preacher's wife whimpered. "For the communion bread." Evelyn had a sudden, sharp memory, a story her grandmother had told her, from the old country, a battlefield remedy. She grabbed a handful of the fine, white flour. "What are you doing?" Severo asked. "Hold him," she said. She took a deep breath and packed the flour, hard, into the bleeding wound. Little Fox screamed, a raw, choked sound, and then his eyes rolled back. But Evelyn did not stop. She packed it tight, the white powder turning to a thick, dark red paste. She kept packing it until the bleeding slowed, then stopped. Then she took one of the long altar strips and bound his ribs, tight. "He will live," she said, her voice shaking. "He will live." The front doors of the church shuddered. A heavy thud. They were using a log, a battering ram. "They are coming in," 2 logs said, his voice calm. He held his hammer. Tahan stood. He was swaying. The fever, the blood loss. It was all catching up. He walked to the front, his rifle in his one good hand. The heavy bar was groaning, the wood splintering. "Get back," he told Severo. "The side. They will come from the side." The bar snapped. The doors burst open. 3 men spilled in. They were met by Severo, who swung a heavy iron candelabra like a club, and by 2 logs, whose hammer was a blur. 1 man went down. A 4th man, younger than the others, barely a boy, scrambled through a shattered window. He saw Tahan. He was 20 feet away. He raised his pistol, his eyes wide with fear and whiskey. Tahan had him. His rifle was up, the barrel centered on the boy's chest. It was an easy shot. He looked at the boy's face. He saw the terror. He saw the stupid, pointless rage. He saw himself, 16 years old, ready to die for a pride he did not understand. He saw Running Wolf. The boy fired. The shot went wide, smashing a plaster saint on the wall. Tahan did not shoot him. He lunged forward, using his one good arm, and swung the heavy rifle like a bat. He smashed the barrel, hard, against the boy's gun hand. The pistol flew. The boy cried out, clutching his broken fingers. He stared at Tahan, his face a mask of disbelief. He had been spared. "Get out," Tahan said, his voice a low growl. "Go home. This is not your death." The boy stared. Then he turned and scrambled back out the window, vanishing into the night. The fight at the door was over. Severo had a long gash on his arm, but the other two attackers were running. The shooting outside was changing. It was sporadic, confused. Then a new sound joined the night. It was not gunfire. It was a cacophony, a rhythmic, metallic clang, clang, clang. "What is that?" Severo panted. Tahan moved to the broken window. He looked out. The townspeople, the ones who had hidden, they were in the street. The baker, the livery owner, the old women from the hotel. They were not fighting. They were making noise. They were banging pots, pans, wagon wheels, anything. It was a defiant, furious, deafening sound. The Triangle Spur men were confused. They were gunmen, not soldiers. They were used to people running from them, not at them. As the riders wheeled their horses, the townspeople grew bolder. They started throwing things. Not bullets, rocks, bricks from a ruined chimney, handfuls of sand and gravel, aimed at the horse's eyes. A horse screamed, blinded by sand, and through its rider, the man, seeing the mob, did not get up to fight. He ran. It was a rout. The noise, the humiliation, the sheer, unexpected courage of the town broke them. They had no leader. They had no plan. They had no pay. They scattered, riding hard out of town, disappearing back into the plains. The noise stopped. The street was silent, save for the rain, the groans of the wounded, and the sound of someone, a woman, sobbing. "It is over," Severo said, leaning on the wall. Tahan's gaze was sharp. He scanned the street. "Where is Pike?" Judge Boone, her dress covered in mud, her face streaked with powder smoke, stalked out of the courthouse. She reloaded the shotgun. "The train station. He is not a fighter. He is a rat, and rats run for the sewer." The freight train was due. They cornered him on the loading platform, just as the long, dark shape of the train groaned to a halt, steam hissing in the rain. Pike was trying to open a boxcar door. Everett Pike, Boone's voice was the law. Pike spun. He was no longer the calm, smiling tyrant. His face was twisted, wet, desperate. "You cannot stop me. That train is federal property. You have no jurisdiction." Tahan, leaning on Severo, stepped into the light of the station lantern. He was a specter, his shoulder a mass of blood, his face gray, but his eyes were burning. Judge Boone did not raise her voice. She walked onto the platform, the rain dripping from her hat. She unfolded a piece of paper, the affidavit, the one Evelyn and Tahan had signed, the one sealed with her wax. "Mr. Everett Pike," she said, her voice cutting through the hiss of the steam. "I have here a legal, binding warrant for your arrest, issued by the Territorial Court, on charges of conspiracy, fraud, bribery, and 2 counts of attempted murder. You are coming to my jail." Pike looked at the paper. He looked at Tahan. He looked at Severo. He knew it was over. The paper had won. They were walking him back when they found him. Owen Doyle. He was hiding in an empty water trough, shivering. When he saw Evelyn, he burst into tears. He fell on his knees in the mud, clutching at her dress. "Evelyn, thank God you have to tell them it was not me. It was Pike." He forced me the girl. The auction. It was his idea. I helped him. Yes, I admit it. I gave him access to the saloon records, but I had to please. Evie, I am your family." Evelyn looked down at the weeping, pathetic man who had sold her. She felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a vast, cold emptiness. She pulled her dress from his grasp. "No," she said, her voice quiet. "You are not my family." She turned to Judge Boone. "He is guilty, Your Honor. He confessed, but I do not want him in your jail. It is too crowded." "What do you ask for, Miss Hart?" the judge asked. "The deed," Evelyn said. "To the saloon, the building, the land it sits on. He will sign it over to me. For my school." "Yes, yes, anything," Doyle sobbed. The deputy shoved a wet transfer form at him. Doyle signed his name, his hands shaking so badly it was almost illegible. He got to his feet and ran, scrambling into the darkness. Gone. The rain began to soften. In the east, the sky was a shade less black. A new sound started. Slow, then steady. Bong, bong, bong. Severo, his arm in a sling, grinned. "2 logs. He is ringing the church bell. He is telling them we are alive." The sound washed over the broken, muddy street, clear and strong in the clean air. Tahan stood, his head high. Evelyn moved to his side, sliding her arm around his waist, holding him up. Her strength his. He was burning with fever, but he was alive. They had paid for their freedom with blood and soot and fear. But as the bell rang out, they were, for the first time, truly free. The fever broke like a thunderstorm. For 3 days, Tahan had walked in the gray world of his ancestors, his body on fire, the pain in his shoulder a distant, burning star. He woke to silence, and the smell of clean linen and coffee. He was in a small, narrow bed in the back room of Severo's smithy. Evelyn was asleep in a chair beside him, her head pillowed on her arms, her face pale and shadowed with exhaustion. His shoulder was tightly bound. He could feel the pull of new stitches. He was weak, but he was alive, and he was clean. The simple fact of it, the absence of mud and blood, felt like a miracle. While he had drifted, Evelyn had worked. She had walked to the saloon, the deed in her pocket. She had thrown open the bat-wing doors, and the town had stopped to watch. The building stank of stale beer, old sweat, and the sour ghost of her uncle's fear. She began by taking every bottle of whiskey from behind the bar, one by one, and smashing them in the muddy street. The sound was a crisp, satisfying punctuation. When she was finished, 2 logs, the old Cheyenne carpenter, appeared. He did not ask. He simply tipped his head. "A school," he said. "Needs benches. That bar is good hardwood." By the time Tahan was able to stand, leaning on a cane Severo had carved for him, the saloon was gone. The walls were whitewashed. The windows, once opaque with grime, let in the clean, hard light of the high plains. The long, sticky bar had been sawn, planed, and reassembled into 5 long, sturdy benches, a huge slate, donated by the mercantile's new owner, hung on the wall where the filthy mirror had been. Little Fox, his ribs bound tight, his arm in a sling, was her first official pupil. He came shyly, followed by his younger sister, then Mrs. Ruiz, the baker's wife, the woman who had started the banging of the pots, arrived. She pushed her 2 sons, their faces scrubbed, into the room. "They know how to bake," Mrs. Ruiz announced, her hands on her hips. "They do not know how to read. This must be fixed." Evelyn stood before them. 4 children, 2 from the town, 2 from the band. She picked up a piece of white chalk. She drew a large, clear A. "This," she said, her voice clear and strong in the quiet room, "is A." She spoke the sound. Then she turned to Little Fox and his sister and said the word Tahan had taught her for antelope. The first bilingual school on the Llano Estacado was in session. They held the celebration at Cottonwood Springs. It was not a holiday. It was a feast of survivors. Held 2 weeks after the fight, the raw, muddy scar of Pike's destroyed dam was still visible. But the grass was already returning. The water ran pure and bright. Severo roasted 2 goats over a long, slow fire, Mrs. Ruiz, who had decided she was in charge of all community functions, organized the town women. They brought baskets of cornbread, apple pies, and fresh butter. Tahan's band rode in from the high country. They came not as warriors, but as families. They brought smoked venison, dried wild plums, and roasted pecans. Mexican, Anglo, Comanche. They sat on blankets by the water that had almost been stolen from them all. They broke bread. Judge Margaret Boone rode out. She did not wear her black robes. She wore a practical split skirt and a clean white blouse. She watched the children, a dozen now, from both the town and the band, playing a loud, screaming game of tag by the water's edge. She found Tahan and Evelyn sitting together, sharing a plate. Tahan was still stiff, his arm in a sling, but the fever was gone, and his strength was returning. "The court," Judge Boone said, her voice holding the faintest trace of a smile, "likes to finalize its paperwork, Miss Hart." She handed Evelyn a folded, heavy document, tied with a ribbon. It was the deed, officially filed and stamped by the territorial seal. The Fort Ellison School, the judge read, "is hereby chartered." Evelyn's hand trembled as she took it. She looked at the building that had been her prison, now her liberation. The judge turned to Tahan. She held a second, thicker packet. "Mr. Tahan, this is a federal injunction based on the Treaty of 1867 and the overwhelming evidence of fraud from Mr. Pike's lockbox." She spoke loud enough for the elders nearby to hear. "It recognizes the Numanu band's soul, traditional and binding right to the water of Cottonwood Springs, in perpetuity. Mr. Pike's lawyers have filed an appeal from the federal jail. They will lose." Tahan took the papers. He looked at the strange, black marks. It was the white man's power, the same power that had taken so much, and now it was returning what was his. The Fort Ellison Gazette printed the story 3 days later. Severo brought the paper to the schoolhouse, a wide grin splitting his face. He handed it to Tahan. Tahan spread the paper on a bench. He had learned to read the white man's language, but slowly, with difficulty. He sounded out the words of the main headline: "Pike conspiracy broken. Community. Cooperation. Secures land and water." He scanned the article. His eyes found his name. He read the sentence, his lips moving silently. The plan, led by local rancher Severo and Comanche leader Tahan, was... He stopped. He read the words again. Comanche leader. Not savage, not renegade, not buck. He looked down the column. The reporter described the fight in the street, calling the town's defense an act of unified heroism. He looked up, his eyes meeting Evelyn's across the room. She was watching him. She had seen the shift. It was the first time the paper world, the world of laws and headlines, had named him a man, a neighbor. The paper was good. The injunction was good. But winter was coming. The band was still hungry. That night, they held a different kind of meeting. Not a celebration, but a planning session. They sat at the long table 2 logs had built in the schoolhouse. Tahan, his elders, Severo, and Evelyn. Her notebook was open, her pencil sharp. "The water is ours," Tahan said, his voice quiet. "But we cannot eat the injunction. We need food for the winter. We need a way to live." "The horses," Severo said. "You still have the studs, the mares. The bloodline is the best on the Llano Estacado." "We have horses," Tahan agreed. "But we need grain to feed them through the deep snow. We need access to the eastern market, to the railroad cars." "The mercantile," Severo said, is under new management, an honest man from St. Louis. He wants business. He will provide the grain, the veterinary supplies. A partnership, Evelyn said, her pencil flying. A cooperative. The Numunu band raises the horses. The town merchants provide the supplies and the access to the railroad. And the profit? One of the elders asked, his voice rough. The profit, Evelyn said, looking him directly in the eye, is split 50-50, transparently, on paper. Tahan looked at Severo. The smith nodded. He looked at the elders. They nodded. It was not charity. It was not a handout. It was a shared rope. It was a future. They rode out to the springs as the sun was setting. The crowds were gone. The air was cold, sharp with the first hint of frost. The muddy, torn earth of the dam site was already settling. The water ran clear and bright over the stones. They stood by the bank, alone, for a long time, just listening to the sound of the water. I am still afraid, Evelyn said at last, her voice small. She was not looking at him. She was watching the water. I am afraid that I will wake up, that this peace is not real, that I will turn around, and the saloon will still be a saloon, that the water will be gone, that you will be gone. Tahan turned to her. He understood this fear. It lived in his own bones. He had seen too many promises broken. He had seen too many good things turn to ash. I have the same fear, he admitted, his voice low. I am afraid that one day you will look at me. You will see the man from the plains, the savage the paper used to write about, and your school, your books, this town you are building. It will not be enough. You will see me, and you will leave. I will never, she began, turning to him, her eyes wide. Do not promise, never, he said, his voice intense. He put his good hand on her arm. Promise me the truth. This marriage, it began as a lie. To stop a lie. It cannot live as one. If the day comes that your heart changes, promise me you will speak it, before it is too late. I promise, she whispered, her heart aching with the terrible, beautiful honesty of his request. If you will promise me the same, no more ghosts, no more secrets, no matter how hard the truth is. I promise, he said. He reached into the pouch on his belt. He took out a small, flat, dark stone. He had found it by the river during the long days of his healing. He had spent the nights when the pain kept him awake, carving it with the tip of his knife. It was a single, deep, clear image. A horse, running free, its mane flying in the wind. He knelt, his shoulder protesting, but his body strong. He found the small stack of stones they had left in the storm, the marker of their first shared fire. He placed his carved stone at the base, setting it firmly in the damp earth by the water's edge. It was not a grave marker. It was not a claim. It was an anchor, a promise to stay. The water of the spring, his water, flowed over it, and Tahan rose and took her hand. The cottonwoods bloomed late that year, after the rains, as if the land itself was celebrating. The trees released their seeds, tiny white puffs of cotton that drifted on the breeze, filling the air by the springs with a soft, summer snow. It settled on the clear, running water and on the shoulders of the small group gathered by the bank. It was not a large wedding. There was no church, no organ, no feast for 100 guests. There was only the land, the water, and the people who had fought for it. Judge Margaret Boone stood on a flat stone, her law book in her hand. She wore her black dress, but she had added a small lace collar, a concession to the day. Severo was there, his arm in a clean sling, standing as Tahan's witness. Mrs. Ruiz, who had wept when Evelyn had asked her, stood as her witness, clutching a bundle of wildflowers. Tahan's band was there, his elders standing in a quiet, dignified line. 2 logs, the carpenter, had come, and Little Fox, his ribs still tightly bound, stood at the front. His face was split in a grin so wide it looked like it might hurt his healing wounds. Tahan wore clean buckskins, simple, unadorned, save for the new, dark stitches on his shoulder. He stood tall, his fever gone, his strength returned. He watched Evelyn walk toward him. She did not wear a white gown. She wore her blue Sunday dress, the one she had worn in the saloon. She had mended the rips and washed it clean of the mud and blood. It was a defiant, proud statement. This was the dress of her capture, and she was reclaiming it as the dress of her freedom. Judge Boone began, her crisp voice a counterpoint to the rush of the water. We are gathered here today, under the law of the territory and the eye of God, to join this man and this woman. We are here to take a document, a paper that began as a shield, and make it a bond, not of property, but of partnership. She read the simple, civil words. They were dry, legal, but in the open air, they felt solid. When she asked Tahan if he took this woman as his lawfully wedded wife, he did not say, I do. He looked at Evelyn, his dark eyes holding hers. I choose her, he said, his voice deep and clear. This day, and all the days. When the judge asked Evelyn, she smiled, her eyes shining. I choose him, this day, and all the days. Then, by the power vested in me, Judge Boone said, I pronounce you husband and wife. But it was not over. An old Numunu elder, a man whose face was a map of the plains, stepped forward. He began to speak, his voice a low, soft chant. He was not speaking to them. He was speaking to the water, to the sky, and to the ancestors. He was telling them that a new family had been made, that a new thread had been woven into the band. He raised his hands and blessed them with the names of the wind and the earth. 2 rituals, 2 cultures, 1 stream. Evelyn's hands were shaking. Tahan took them. She had a gift. She held out a small, plain book, a first reader, on the cover. In neat, careful embroidery, she had stitched his name, Tahan. This, she said, her voice thick, is for the lessons we will write together, our future. He took it with his left hand, his good hand, his touch reverent. He had a gift for her, as well. He did not have a ring. He held out a long, narrow strip of horsehair, braided with dyed porcupine quills into a beautiful, intricate pattern. It was a set of reins, the mark of a master horseman. My hands, he said, his voice rough with an emotion he rarely showed. My strength, my trade, my heart, it is all I have to give. He looped the reins gently around her wrist. The elder brought a single white ribbon. He tied their hands together. Tahan's left, Evelyn's right. The knot was simple. Not a prison, but a link, bound. The first person to hug them was Little Fox. He threw his good arm around Tahan, and then, surprising himself, he hugged Evelyn tight. You are my sister now, he whispered, his voice cracking. And you are my brother, she whispered back, her eyes closed tight. Little Fox stepped back, trying to regain his dignity. He looked at the schoolhouse, then back at Tahan. It is a good arrangement, he announced, his voice loud. Now, I am a student, but I am also. He puffed out his chest. The head stable manager for the new Comanche Cooperative Horse Program. It is a very important job. Evelyn laughed. And who appointed you? I did, Tahan said, a rare, bright smile lighting his face. He is the only one who can read the feed orders and break a wild horse. It is a strange school. Little Fox grinned. The only one on the plains with a real blackboard on one wall and a saddle hanging on the other. I think I will like it. The news of the rest of the world filtered in slowly. On the back of the train that no longer seemed a threat, Everett Pike had been taken east, to a federal courthouse. His lawyers, paid with the last of his hidden gold, argued that the territory had no jurisdiction. But the evidence from the lockbox, the bribery, the mail fraud, the conspiracy, was ironclad. He would not be returning to the Llano Estacado. Barton Hale, in exchange for his testimony, had his sentence reduced to 10 years. He was sent to a hard rock prison in the east, a cage of stone for a man of the plains. Owen Doyle was never seen again. He had vanished into the west, a ghost of a man, leaving behind nothing but a profound, quiet relief. The saloon was now, truly, just a memory. The next dry season came, but it was different. The fear was gone. The new, honest merchant at the Mercantile honored the partnership. Grain wagons rolled out to Tahan's camp, and long, strong lines of horses, Tahan's paint bloodline, were led to the railroad cars, their flanks stamped with the cooperative's new brand, a simple circle, representing the springs. The train whistle was still a lonely sound, but it was no longer a threat. It was the sound of the outside world. It brought new books for Evelyn's school, which now had 20 children, sitting on benches Tahan and 2 logs had built. It brought glass for the windows, and seed for the new gardens. It was a line, not of conquest, but of connection. That evening, Tahan and Evelyn walked to the springs. The air was cool, the sky a deep, bruised purple. The cottonwoods were green, their leaves rustling in the wind. The schoolhouse was dark and quiet, as was the town. They stood by the bank, at the place where Tahan had laid the carved stone, the place where Judge Boone had bound their hands. Evelyn knelt. She touched the smooth, cold stone, its carved horse a familiar shape under her fingers. Tahan knelt beside her. He put his hand over hers. His palm was warm, strong, his skin rough against hers. They did not speak. They did not need to. She thought of the saloon, the terror, the feeling of being a thing, an item for sale. "You know," she said, her voice a whisper, "he was wrong. Pike, I was not a thing to be bought. I was not even a person who was rescued." He looked at her, his dark eyes quiet in the dusk. "I was a person who was chosen," she said, her voice clear and strong. "And I am a person who chooses him back every single sunrise." He raised her hand, his hand still covering hers, and he pressed his lips to her knuckles. They stayed there, kneeling by the rushing water, their hands clasped her over the stone that marked their home. Freedom, she thought, was not about breaking chains. It was not about running. It was about finding a hand in the darkness and choosing freely to hold it, no matter how hard the wind or how deep the dust. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We are so glad you were here with us. We would love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Please let us know in the comments and share your thoughts on Tahan and Evelyn's journey. It would mean the world to us if you would subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. And please, if you enjoyed this story, hit that hype button so we can share these tales with more people just like you.